What could make a wealthy CEO disguise himself as a janitor, all because of a single sausage that tasted different? What really happened? That evening, the wind swept through the porch of a restaurant called Iron Flame, once a symbol of bold, Southern-style smoked flavors. A man stepped down from an old pickup truck, his posture quiet, wearing a worn-out baseball cap and foggy, round glasses. No one recognized that the man quietly walking through the front door was Ethan Rowe, founder and CEO of the Iron Flame restaurant chain, the one who had turned his grandmother's smoked sausage recipe into a 200-location empire across 12 states. But today, he didn't carry the glow of a leader, only the silence of someone trying to find something quietly slipping away. The financial reports from the last 3 months painted a troubling picture. Profits had dropped sharply, and customer ratings were plummeting. There was no clear explanation, but Ethan sensed something that numbers could never reveal. The flavor was fading, and so was the soul of Iron Flame. He chose not to announce his visit, brought no bodyguards, no assistants, just himself arriving at the Lexington branch, the very location where his grandmother had once approved the first menu item. Entering the restaurant, Ethan said nothing. He sat quietly in a corner and ordered the Flame Classic, 2 smoked sausage links with mashed potatoes, pickled cabbage, and a slice of cornbread. The food arrived after 20 minutes, later than the company's standard. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the wait time. It was the moment he sliced into the sausage and took a bite. The first sensation felt familiar: the snap of the casing, the smoky aroma, the sweet meat. But then, the spice rushed in too quickly and the aftertaste fell flat. It wasn't a mixing mistake. It was the wrong recipe. Ethan took another bite to be sure. That's when a voice whispered from behind the counter, "Relax, Cassidy. The original recipe is gone. Griller's Peak is about to launch their version and we've got 20 grand in our account. Who would ever suspect?" Ethan's heart clenched. He put his fork down, turned his head away, and pretended to scroll his phone. But inside, every sense was pulled taut like a wire. He had found his first lead, not just a minor kitchen error, but a clear sign of betrayal. And from that moment on, the investigation had officially begun. The next morning, at the delivery entrance behind the Iron Flame Lexington branch, a man stood silently in front of a grease-stained, faded metal sign, holding a crumpled job application in one hand. His boots were caked with mud, and his steps carried the weariness of someone who had spent too many nights on the road. He introduced himself as Lewis Cooper, a seasonal laborer from Alabama with no permanent address, just looking for any kind of manual job where he could keep his head down. Few would have guessed that behind that unfamiliar name and those tired eyes was Ethan Rowe, the CEO who had quietly decided to step into the heart of his own operation. The one who received his application that day was Ryder McLean, the branch manager. Without suspicion, Ryder glanced at the paperwork and tossed him an apron with a shrug, saying, "Short-staffed in the back kitchen, mop the floors, clean the ovens, just don't get in anyone's way." Ethan gave a slight nod, said nothing, and thanked him with a southern drawl he had practiced all night. On his very first shift, Ethan stepped into a world both familiar and foreign. The kitchen he had once meticulously designed was now damp, disorganized, with spices scattered about and refrigerators stuffed with ingredients of questionable origin. But what truly chilled him was the attitude, detached and indifferent, as if every rule his grandmother had once taught him about respecting guests and taking pride in every slice of sausage had been erased. Joel, the head cook, juggled a phone call while barking orders like he was running a mafia meeting. "Cut the steaming process short. Save the wood charcoal. The smoke smells still there. No one will notice." Ethan quietly wiped grease from under the oven, ears tuned into every word. Among them all, only one person seemed out of sync with the rotting machine around her: Cassidy, the waitress he had overheard the night before. She didn't talk much or join in the gossip, but when a customer complained the sausage was too spicy, she quietly apologized, replaced the plate, and even made sure to pick a better portion. When she thought no one was looking, she discreetly wiped down neglected tables and refolded napkins with care. Ethan took note of each of her small gestures, not with curious eyes, but with the gaze of someone searching for integrity among the ashes. At the end of the shift, as everyone else packed up to leave, Cassidy brought him a cup of hot tea. Without meeting his eyes, she said softly, "You got the grease under the fryer cleaned out today. The last guy left it there for a whole week." Ethan nodded slightly, replying with a faint smile. Inside him, a vague feeling began to grow, that this investigation wouldn't just be about exposing traitors, but about rediscovering what had once defined Iron Flame, the dignity found in even the smallest job. 4 days passed in the guise of Lewis Cooper, and Ethan had gradually adapted to the rhythm of life inside that kitchen. A chaotic pulse of sizzling pans, the low whir of receipt printers, and hushed conversations that only those who stayed after closing time ever heard. He learned how to move without a sound, how to smile just enough, lower his gaze at the right moment, and how to store every broken sentence around him like scattered pieces of an unfinished painting. But on the 4th night, while cleaning the spice station, Ethan accidentally caught sight of Joel, the head chef. Smirking as he read a text message on his phone, his eyes skimmed over a name that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "Ryder says next month is the mark. That's when Nathan will move for statewide rollout." Ethan froze behind the half-swinging wooden door, his heart stopping for a beat. Ryder he could understand. The branch manager who treated staff like disposable tools. But the name Nathan Blake, that was unthinkable. Nathan was Iron Flame's chief strategy officer, once Ethan's closest friend, the man who had helped conceive the firewood line back at an old cafe in Nashville, who once shared smoked sausage with Ethan's grandmother on Thanksgiving. And now that very man was apparently preparing to launch that recipe outside the company as a new product for Griller's Peak, their fiercest commercial rival. Ethan clenched his fists and quietly returned to the dishwashing station, pretending to know nothing. But in his mind, fractures were beginning to spread. This was no longer just about one rogue branch. It was about an entire system being hollowed out from within. At the same time, another thought gnawed at him. Cassidy, the waitress who had unknowingly mentioned something about the missing recipe earlier, didn't seem fully aware of what was happening. She continued working hard, quietly picking up after others, always shrinking back when Joel or Ryder raised their voices. But that night, as Cassidy sat alone by the hand-washing sink after closing, Ethan approached her, pretending to wipe down the nearby counter, and casually asked, "Do you ever wonder why the sausage tastes different now?" Cassidy didn't look up, just let out a soft sigh. "I know, but if you ask too much, they'll move you to night shifts. Or cut your hours." Ethan nodded, as if he shared her struggle, but in truth, he had just uncovered the first real link. Ryder was the connection between head chef Joel and Nathan Blake, and if his suspicions were correct, this betrayal wasn't personal. It was systemic, directed, and driven by a clear agenda. Iron Flame was being strangled from the inside out, and Ethan would have to dig even deeper to bring it all into the light. Saturday night at Iron Flame Lexington was quieter than usual, but the stench of burnt frying oil and the clattering exhaust fans still made the air feel heavier than normal. Ethan was cleaning the prep station when he heard Joel's voice coming from the back storage room, low and laced with implication. "Next week Nathan's sending the final packet. Ryder says let the branches collapse on their own. Griller's Peak will scoop them up one by one for pennies." Ethan froze, his hand gripping the rag suspended midair. The final packet? Buying out the branches? What he had once feared was no longer just speculation. It was an orchestrated takedown, and the one behind it was none other than Nathan Blake, co-founder of Iron Flame, the very man Ethan had trusted enough to share both the original recipe and access to the security system. On paper, Nathan still held the title of Chief Strategy Officer in charge of Southern market expansion. But in reality, he was manipulating everything from within, deliberately allowing profits to drop at key locations, driving down the company's value, and paving the way for Griller's Peak to quietly seize control. Ethan thought back to recent meetings, the proposals to cut ingredient costs, streamline the cooking process, automate the marination step. They had all come from Nathan. Back then, Ethan had felt something was off, but his loyalty to their old friendship had clouded his judgment. Now he didn't just feel betrayed, he was furious at himself for letting someone else corrupt the legacy his grandmother had built. After the shift, Ethan sat alone in the back courtyard, where the scent of hickory smoke used to linger in the air like a familiar welcome. But tonight, all that remained was the harsh bite of compressed charcoal and reused cooking oil. He pulled out his phone, opened a note, and began mapping out the chain of involvement. Nathan at the strategic level, Ryder at the branch level, Joel executing on the ground. But who else? Cassidy? Still unclear. She seemed quiet, but was she hiding something? That question remained unanswered. Ethan knew he needed a breakthrough. Something undeniable, something that would expose not just those on the ground, but the shadows perched higher up. And to do that, he needed bait, something valuable enough to draw out the vultures. Then, like a bolt of lightning, the answer hit him. Legacy Blend. The original spice formula, encrypted and stored on a server with access limited to just 4 people. If he could create a fake version that was convincing enough to be stolen, then whoever made the first move would reveal themselves. Ethan smirked. The game had begun, and he would be the one holding the final piece. That day, the sky hung heavy and gray, as if it too could feel the rot quietly seeping through every brick of the Iron Flame Lexington kitchen. By noon, the customer rush had surged unexpectedly, the kitchen running at full throttle, and the order printer stuttering like it was about to give out. Ethan, still playing the role of Lewis Cooper, had to move non-stop, wiping counters, stacking trays, swapping out oil barrels, his shirt soaked with sweat. Joel was irritable, Ryder was barking orders, and the entire team seemed stretched to the brink. But there was a moment that made Ethan pause, not from exhaustion, but from the weight tightening in his chest. It was when he saw Cassidy, standing alone by the sink after the lunch rush, scrubbing a stainless steel tray with an intensity that didn't match the task. Her cheeks were flushed, her back rigid, but her eyes were cast downward, avoiding everyone. Ethan approached, gently set a tray beside her, and asked softly, "You okay?" Cassidy didn't turn, just replied curtly, "I'm fine." But her voice quivered slightly, betraying the truth. He didn't press further, just stood beside her and worked in silence. A moment later, she walked away without another word. That evening, in the familiar back courtyard near the trash bins and the side prep station, Ethan leaned against the wall, sipping water when Cassidy appeared. No makeup, no rush, just a tired young woman with quiet eyes staring off into the distance like she was remembering something that used to be beautiful. "Have you ever worked somewhere that made you feel like you were creating something that mattered?" she asked, not turning her head. Ethan answered softly, "Yeah, a long time ago." She gave a sad smile. "This place used to be like that, before Ryder came, before the sausage was cooked in electric ovens instead of over wood fire, before they called smoke flavor a waste of fuel and spices and unnecessary expense." Ethan said nothing. Her words confirmed everything he'd suspected. The process had changed, but worse, the spirit had been suffocated. "I once told them the sausage didn't taste right anymore. They said I was resisting the system. The next day, they moved me from morning prep to night shift. Everyone thinks I keep quiet because I'm afraid of losing my job. But the truth is, I'm just tired." Cassidy finally turned, her eyes meeting Ethan's, no longer angry, just bitter with quiet acceptance. "But then I see the new kids. Every one of them trying hard, needing the work. If I leave, who's left to hold on to whatever good is still here?" Ethan nodded, a tightness swelling in his chest. In that moment he realized that amid betrayal and despair, there was still someone quietly protecting the soul of what he thought had been lost. And for someone like Cassidy, he couldn't let the fire go out. He just couldn't. Early Monday morning, Ethan drove to Iron Flame's R&D headquarters in Nashville, where the company's most heavily secured servers stored all original recipes, including the Legacy Blend, the signature spice mix that defined the entire empire. He met directly with Diana Chen, head of security, the only person in the company who knew what he was doing and the one he trusted without question. "I need a decoy version of the legacy recipe," Ethan said, his voice low and firm. "Structured to match 95%, convincing enough to be stolen, but embedded with a distinct chemical signature for traceability." Diana nodded without hesitation, as if she had been preparing for this moment all along. "You want it to leak?" "No, I'm going to accidentally open it at the Lexington branch, on a device connected to the internal network. If someone's been siphoning data from the inside, they'll take the bait." 36 hours later, the file was packaged under the label of a proposed new product named Legacy 2.0, with a hidden tracking code buried deep in the metadata. Ethan printed a hard copy, sealed it in an internal envelope, and deliberately left it out on the prep counter at the restaurant, labeled Test Materials, Internal Use Only. He didn't say a word to anyone, didn't attach any warnings, just placed it there and pretended to walk off to fix a jammed floor scrubber. When he returned 10 minutes later, the envelope was gone. He asked no questions. He showed no concern. He simply smiled faintly like a janitor too used to the mess. That night, while resting outside in the back courtyard, Cassidy stepped out carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked, setting a cup beside him. "Strange how?" he replied. "The staff tablets suddenly got access to the internal management directory. That folder's normally restricted to supervisors only." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Who was using it?" Cassidy bit her lip. "I saw Joel with it. Said Ryder asked him to check something." Ethan nodded, locking the detail in his mind. Another piece of evidence. But it didn't stop there. 2 days later, during the lunch break, 2 new hires were chatting at the outdoor tables when one of them said, "Hey, did you hear? Griller's Peak is launching a new artisan sausage line. Word is, it's called Smoked Ember. Tastes a lot like the old Iron Flame stuff, but upgraded and exclusive." Ethan nearly dropped his drink. Smoked Ember. The name he himself had proposed a year ago for a premium line that never made it to launch. And now it was about to debut under the name of the company that stole his family's legacy. He clenched his fists. The trap had been sprung, and now it was time to trace the trail, starting from the device that accessed the restricted directory. Back at his motel, Ethan opened his laptop and messaged Diana. "Pull all access logs from the last 72 hours at Lexington. Flag any unfamiliar IPs, especially anything connecting to the R&D directory. Track it to the source." The reply came in less than 30 minutes. Unauthorized access was made from a staff tablet, logged in under the name Ryder McLean. Data was transmitted to an IP address linked to Griller's Peak headquarters in Chicago. Ethan stared at the screen. There was no doubt left, and now they knew they were being watched. But Ethan wasn't worried, because from this moment on, the game was no longer hidden. It was face to face. The atmosphere in the kitchen felt different from the very next morning. Ethan could sense an invisible tension weaving through every sentence, every quick glance that darted away the moment eyes met. Ryder was absent, but his absence felt more like a signal, a warning that the storm was coming. At the end of the lunch shift, while Ethan was organizing supply crates in the back storage room, he heard Joel's voice coming from the delivery area, hurried yet dripping with smugness. "Yeah, he bought it completely. A fake recipe nobody knows." Ryder said Nathan already sent it to the design team. They're printing labels, launching national promos, billboards, and everything. It's going to be a huge splash. Then his voice dropped. "Old man Lewis? What's he going to find out? He can't even unlock the damn tablet." Ethan held his breath behind the stacks of oil drums, fury pulsing in his veins like they were about to rupture. That arrogance, that smug disdain was the trademark of men who thought they had already won, and it would be the very blade that turned against them. He didn't record anything this time. He didn't need to. Joel had already left more than enough evidence. Ethan returned to the kitchen as if he hadn't heard a thing, his face calm, still holding the mop like someone used to fading into the background of other people's stage. But inside, everything had turned to stone, cold, sharp, and ready. That night he called Diana. "Final step," he said. I want a little reunion. Quiet. Precise. But fast enough that none of them can run. Diana understood instantly. She set the time, scheduled the meeting, and gathered enough legal ammunition to go head-to-head. Not just with Ryder, Joel, or Nathan, but with the board members at Griller's Peak, who had been enabling them from the shadows. The next morning, Cassidy arrived early for her shift. She didn't see Lewis. But she did notice a company-branded envelope placed neatly on the office desk. Inside was an internal transfer notice, officially stamped and signed by the Central Region HR office. At the bottom, handwritten in ink, one final line read, "Be ready when the truth is spoken. The honest ones will be named first." Cassidy stood still for a moment, her heart a mix of confusion and a strange, rising sense of foreboding. She didn't yet understand what was happening, but something in her gut told her that something big was about to break. And for the first time in years, justice might finally walk into the kitchen of Iron Flame. Elsewhere, Ethan stood in front of the mirror in his small hotel room, tightening a black tie, adjusting his cuffs, brushing off the invisible dust of 2 weeks spent living as someone else. Today, he was no longer Lewis. He was Ethan Rowe. And he was coming back. Not to ask, but to end it. A light drizzle tapped against the windows, each drop clinging briefly before breaking apart, as if signaling that an unusual morning was about to unfold. The atmosphere inside Iron Flame Lexington was eerily quiet, as if the entire kitchen were holding its breath. Everyone kept working, still exchanging small talk and quiet laughs, but there was something different in the way footsteps echoed, in how pans were stirred, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. At exactly 10:47 a.m., the front door chimed softly. A woman in a charcoal gray pantsuit stepped inside, her stride firm, her gaze razor-sharp, unfazed, despite standing in the middle of a modest diner. No one in the restaurant knew she was Diana Chen, Iron Flame's head of corporate security, a former FBI agent, carrying a dossier capable of shaking 2 corporations to their core. Diana ordered 2 smoked sausage meals to go, paid in cash, then quietly took a seat in the corner, her eyes scanning the room with a calm intensity that cut like X-ray vision. Just 5 minutes later, another figure entered. A man in an expensive knit coat, with a hint of silver in his hair, yet still radiating familiar authority. It was Nathan Blake. He sensed nothing unusual. Still scrolling through his phone, he casually asked the server at the counter, "Is Ryder in his office? Tell him someone from strategy is dropping by." Cassidy, who happened to be working the counter that day, froze but said nothing. She turned toward the back, about to call out, when her eyes met someone emerging from the kitchen. He was tall, dressed in a simple gray shirt, standing upright, holding a thin folder in his hand. His eyes, no longer weary, burned with the focused glow of embers in a smoker's fire. Cassidy stood motionless. It wasn't Lewis, the hunched janitor she'd seen each night, but Ethan Rowe, founder of Iron Flame. Silence flooded the room. A kitchen staff member dropped a stainless steel tray, the clang echoing like the opening bell of a battle. Nathan turned, stunned. "Ethan?" he choked out, his face paling. Ethan didn't answer. He walked slowly to the counter, placing the folder on the wooden surface. "You think I didn't know?" he said calmly. "All the strategy documents, the recipe files, the expansion plans, even the draft of Smoked Ember. I have them all." Ryder rushed out of the office, only to stop cold when he saw Diana. His phone slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a screen still lit by an unsent message. "Careful, I think something's wrong." Ethan didn't need to raise his voice. He turned to the entire staff. "For the past 2 weeks, I've worked here. I've listened, I've observed, and I've documented every act you thought no one noticed. I know who sold the recipe. I know who helped. And I know who, like Cassidy, tried to preserve what was right." Nathan stammered. "This is a misunderstanding, I can explain." "You'll get your chance," Ethan cut in, pushing the folder toward Diana. "With legal counsel. and with the full board of directors. What remained in the room were wide eyes, lowered heads, and a truth that could no longer be denied. The era of manipulation was over, and the founder, for the first time in years, had returned not to manage, but to cleanse every foul trace from his family's legacy. 3 days later, Ethan stood before Iron Flame's senior executive board, no longer the man operating from the shadows, no longer the silent founder. He stood tall, his gaze cold and voice steady, with a large projection screen behind him showing 2 images. On the left was the original handwritten legacy blend recipe, penned by his grandmother on a wrinkled sheet of paper from 1978. On the right was the chemical simulation of smoked ember, the knockoff product launched by Griller's Peak less than 72 hours after the leak. No one in the room said a word. The CFO, the heads of HR and production, each shifted uneasily, leaning back or fidgeting in their seats, all aware this was no longer an internal matter. This was a reckoning. Ethan closed his laptop, crossed his arms, and looked each person in the eye. "I'm not standing here to assign blame," he said, his tone firm and clear. "I'm here to patch the holes that allowed them to crawl in." But the story didn't end with removing Ryder, Joel, and Nathan. Ethan wasn't seeking a simple purge. He wanted to rebuild from the very core that had decayed. That same afternoon, an internal bulletin was sent out. Every branch would undergo a full-scale audit, starting from ingredient sourcing and cooking processes to employee training programs. But Ethan didn't stop at operational reform. He aimed for the people. He implemented a new profit-sharing system for chefs and shift leads, the ones who upheld quality each day. A new anonymous hotline was launched, connected directly to headquarters, allowing employees to report irregularities without fear of retaliation or demotion. Most importantly, he restored what had once defined Iron Flame: real smoke, real flavor, and real pride. Heritage Flame was announced as the name for the revived original sausage line. Not a polished imitation, but the truest version of the past. Ethan personally selected the spice vendors, rejected every suggestion to shorten the process, and insisted on maintaining the full 14-hour hickory wood smoking time, just like in the old days. The betrayal wasn't broadcast publicly, but whispers of the CEO who disguised himself as a janitor spread throughout the system. Every branch hung the same vintage photograph again. Ethan's grandmother tying sausage links by hand, with a quiet fire glowing behind her in a brick oven. During a regular training session back in Lexington, the place where everything had started, Cassidy stood before 3 new employees, teaching them how to hold a knife, how to twist a string, and how to recognize the scent of real smoke. When Ethan walked in, she looked up and smiled. "How much longer are you planning to make me wait for that management position?" she asked, half teasing, half serious. Ethan laughed. "This time it's not just a title, it's a journey, and you're the first." And a week later, the news spread quietly. Cassidy Alvarez had been appointed Assistant Regional Training Director. No press release, no photos online, just her mother calling in tears over the phone, and Ethan saving that voicemail in a private folder. As proof that not every victory needs to be loud. Some victories are enough just by being quiet. One autumn morning, with a soft layer of mist still blanketing the air and the first wool coat of the season just pulled from the closet, Ethan returned to where it all began. The small kitchen behind his grandmother's heritage home in Franklin. The room wasn't large, just enough for 2 people to turn their backs while tending the fire, but it held his entire childhood. The scent of hickory wood soaked into the brick walls, handwritten notes bound with twine, a wooden table worn at the edges with time, and an old window that still stuck halfway open, just like when he was a boy wiping down counters. No one else was there, just him. Ethan opened the aged drawer beside the stove and took out a dark wooden box. A faint aroma of black pepper and clove rose as he lifted the lid. Inside were wrinkled, yellowed sheets of paper, written in the rounded handwriting of a woman who cooked more by instinct than by recipe. Not all of them were instructions. Some were reminders, like whispered advice. "Don't rush. Let the meat rest 12 hours for deeper flavor." Or, "Smoke can't be hurried. Wood that breaks too fast won't age the fire. But the note that made Ethan fall silent was scrawled on the back of an old grocery receipt in red ballpoint pen. You can't mass-produce pride. He read it aloud, letting each word echo through the kitchen. No one answered, but he didn't need a reply. He knew his grandmother wouldn't have said anything, just smiled gently, her hands still tying sausage links in that familiar rhythm. Standing in that room, he realized what had nearly been lost. Not the recipe, not the profit, but the standard. The way people treat what they create when no one is watching and no reward is promised. Respect, not out of fear, but from knowing what is right. Ethan returned the note to the box, gently closed the lid, and placed it back on the old shelf as if restoring a legacy. Then he turned, walked out of the kitchen, his gaze never looking back. Not because he had forgotten, but because he carried it with him. At that same moment in the Lexington branch, Cassidy was teaching a group of new employees how to twist sausage links by hand. One of them asked, "Are we allowed to try adding more black pepper?" She smiled. "If you know how to balance the flavor, then try it. Just remember, the most important thing isn't in the spice. It's in how we respect every wisp of smoke, every slice of meat." Across the room, an older customer tasted the new sausage, then looked up. This tastes like what I used to eat at church years ago. It's not just the flavor, it's the feeling. Sir Ethan, seated quietly in the corner, nodded softly. That feeling didn't come from a recipe. It came from legacy. A legacy now preserved not by slogans, but by people who understood that fire isn't just for cooking, it's for reigniting trust. And that is the one thing that can never be stolen. In business, the easiest thing to steal isn't a recipe or an asset, it's trust. And when trust is betrayed, only courage and principle can reclaim what was lost. Ethan Rowe didn't just recover a recipe, he restored a legacy by stepping into the most decayed part of his own empire and reigniting the flame from within. If this story made you see work, trust, and responsibility from a different perspective, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring the lives of those who dare to stand for what is right. And leave a comment with the words, "Keep the flame," if you believe that true values are always worth protecting.